evening, my beloved friends, and welcome to the 30th Sunday of the year A, and to this session of our homily highlights. Our theme for today is divine love, the vertical and horizontal dimensions versus the Nigeria of today. I'd like to begin with a story about a man who saw a dream. And in that dream, there was so much activity in a particular church. It was like a liturgical action was going on. And so the priest was gallivanting the entire altar, preaching boisterously. But he wasn't being heard by this man in the dream. The keyboardist was junketing the keyboard, playing and exerting his fingers on the keyboard. And yet the sound was not coming forth. The choir was singing and cascading about, projecting their voices. And yet their voices were not being heard. There was so much activity in the church. Everybody was moving around. There was so much life and energy in the church. And yet this man could not perceive nor even understand anything that was happening in that church. And so he called forth to an angel that was accompanying him in that dream and said, "What is it? I don't seem to feel anything. I don't seem to understand anything." And then the angel told him in that dream, that is exactly how it is in any church in which there is activity without love. It is like activity without worship. It is like heat without light. Jesus in today's gospel highlights this indispensability of love. That without love, anything we are doing as Christians are just mere exertions. It's just like someone who is writing a full book with a pen that is inkless. We also find this corroboration in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where Paul himself tells us that any activity without love is like empty noise. I've had time in the past to talk about the calligraphy of love. And I have always argued that everything we can talk about love, especially from the English point of view, can be seen from the way the letters that make up love are written. I have argued this severally in my sermons and in my homilies, and I've also written it. Because I see in the way the word love is written, all that we can talk about love, generally, especially in terms of definition of divine love. Even the word divine is superfluous because every love is divine. But because of the ambivalence that has been associated with love in our time today, we like to talk about divine love. But we know that God is love. That's John chapter 4, verse 8. And so when we talk about love, we know it is always divine. So I said that in writing love, you look at the word L, and you see a horizontal and a vertical dimension joined together. And it speaks to me about love as having a horizontal and vertical dimension. Love coming from God but diffusing to man. And the O that comes after, the spherical nature of love, tells us that love does not discriminate. Because in Christian and divine love, everybody is your brother, everybody is your neighbor. The office person, the trader, the person who is not even from your tribe, the person who is begging around your corner, your maid, the person who is your subject, the person who is your leader, the person who doesn't share the same views, all have divine spark. That is the O. V tells us that love comes from God and goes back to God. Because when we show love to the man, we have also shown God to God whom we cannot see. That's what the Bible tells us. And E tells us that love, Christian love, draws from and climaxes in God, the Trinitarian God, who in God the Father creates in love, in God the Son redeems out of love, and in God the Holy Spirit sanctifies in love. In fact, Romans chapter 5 verse 5 calls the Holy Spirit the love of God poured into our hearts. St. Augustine said that God the Father is the lover, God the Son is the beloved, and God the Holy Spirit is the love with which God the Father loves God the Son. So there are three equal strokes joined by one, and for me it is symbolic of the Trinity, three in one God. We can go on and talk about love. But the scenario we find today in the gospel of today is quite revealing. A disconcerting lawyer has come to ask Jesus about which is the greatest commandment. And in answering just one question, Jesus answers two. In order to show us not just the indispensability of love, but the inseparability of the horizontal dimension from the vertical dimension. You must love God, but you must love your neighbor. In the answer of Jesus also, Jesus tells us it's not just about loving God, but loving God with what? So Jesus speaks about the intensity of love. And Jesus speaks about the expansity of love, the intensity, the expansity, and the priority of love, the summative nature in love. Because once somebody is able to love God well and love his neighbor well, the person has been able to keep all of the commandments. In fact, what Jesus said in the gospel of today is that all of the laws are hinged on these two. So in Jesus' reply and response in the gospel of today, we see not just the indispensability of love, but the inseparability of love of God with the love of neighbor, the intensity of love, and the expansity of love, and the priority and summative nature of love. These are the things that we find. Let us look at the vertical dimension. Jesus said we must love God. But the interest is not just loving God, but loving God with what? That's the intensity. Loving God with all your heart. Loving God with all your heart means to love God with all your affection in your heart. All your affection and passion. The heart is the core of intimacy. The heart is the seat of feelings and desires. In other words, the love of God dominates your entire feelings and passion in such a way that it is the love of God that determines even your desires for other things. He says we must love God with all our soul and spirit. The soul, in other words, what it means is to love God with all devotion and vision. The soul is the seat of inner consciousness. It's the seat of all ends, all vision. The soul is the seat of all inner longing. Psalm 42 says, like a deer yearns for running streams, so my soul yearns for you. To love God with your soul means to desire God above every other thing. To have God as your ultimate vision. To have God indeed as your ultimate consciousness, ultimate passion and devotion. To dedicate the entirety of your life to the love of God. And number 3, he says, you must love God with your entire mind. That means to love God with your entire meditation, contemplation, and decision. Because the mind is the seat of rationality, it is the seat of decision, it is the seat of willing. In other words, loving God with your mind means that God becomes the object of your entire study, your entire mental search, your entire interrogation and investigation. We want to know God more. We want to discover God more. And we see it in the love of God. That love of God makes you want to know God. You want to know more about God because just like in human love, the person you love, you want to talk with the person, you want to stay with the person, you want to know the person more. And then finally he says, love God with your strength. In other words, to love God with your action and human exertions. God becomes also the object of your human resources. You deploy your capabilities and your strength in serving this God that you claim that you love. You do something, it's not just verbal. You deploy your strength in the service of God. So to love God in these 4 areas is actually what it means to love God with intensity. And then when we come to the the horizontal dimension, to love your neighbor as yourself. What it means is to love your neighbor with, number 1, compassion. In other words, you feel some set of sympathy. That's to love one with sympathy, with genuine feeling about the conditions of your neighbor. Number 2, to love that person with consideration, that is with empathy. You are not just feeling for the person, but you are now trying to take the position of the person, to put yourself in the place of the person. If people who claim that they love today can love with empathy, Nigeria will be better. To imagine yourself in that person's shoes. That's what it means to love with empathy, to love with consideration, and finally to love with action. That's to love with commitment. You are not just professing love, you are doing something to better the condition of the person that you love. In other words, true love is shown. True love is not just told. The person that you say you love, what are you doing for the betterment of the person? It's an act of will. And because it's an act of will, it's an act of will that provokes some action from you to better the life of the person that you have professed love to. So to love horizontally with intensity and expansivity is to love with consideration, with compassion, and with action. But what is the situation of Nigeria today? That is the context of today. That's the theme. These vertical and horizontal dimensions of divine love versus the Nigeria of today. When I look at Nigeria today, I look at our society today, we discover that it is a far cry from this projection of Jesus about what love should be. How I wish we had time. But think about Nigeria. Think about the level of viciousness, the level of selfishness, the level of wickedness, the level of violence, the level of suppression, the level of intimidation that we find around us in Nigeria today. Everything about us in Nigeria smacks of unlove. Everybody is struggling for their own good. Nobody discovers that another person has also the divine spark. Just imagine our leaders in Nigeria without any iota of feeling, consideration, and compassion for the people that they are leading. I was just watching a clip today, and a senator was being interviewed about how senators would talk about 140 million worth of cars in a country where people cannot eat 3 square meals a day. And the senator was trying to find a justification for it. People who are meant to represent the poor masses, who were voted into office or claimed to have been voted into office, just to go and represent the interests of the poor masses. And how they are reveling in luxury, in abundance, where the people who are supposed to represent are smoldering under the harshest condition of poverty. That is the situation we have. Look at how justice has been compromised and bastardized by the judiciary in our world today. Look at instances of abuse by all and sundry. The rich are abusing the poor. The mighty are abusing the weak. The strong exploiting the weak. The lecturers are abusing their students. The law agents and police officers who are on the road trying to malign those that are supposed to protect, exploiting them and abusing them. The traditional masquerades in our own society, standing on the road, trying to malign people, beating pregnant women, collecting money from those who are passing in the name of tradition. Where do we find love in our world today? Everybody is having a field day on their fellow people, victimizing those who are supposed to be even what they condemn. Everybody. All around us. Look at our different local communities. See the level of unforgiveness, the level of bitterness, the level of rancor, the level of envy, the level of calumny. And we understand that I'm sure heaven must be shedding tears today. Jesus says, this is the highest, but it is this highest of Jesus that we have gone far away from. If we love God, then God is our root. Positive loving actions should be the fruits. That's what every Christian must be. And indeed, the paradox of life is that those who deserve our love least are those who need it most. The entire readings of today, the spirit of love was what was encouraged in the first reading of today. But that spirit of love and consideration is what is lacking in Nigeria today. Responsorial Psalm is about the love of God. I love you, Lord, my strength. Loving God with your heart, in which God becomes the center of your life in Psalm 17. Today, even Christians and men of God who profess Christianity, we have mushrooming and proliferation of churches every day. How much of they love God? Hypocrisy is what we find about. And see how they're exploiting their victims. That's what we have in our world today. Zechariah reading talks about practical expression of that love in being a true witness. And Jesus himself is asking us today to love. Love God and do what you want. Love God truly and love your neighbor truly. You will discover your actions will all be in consonance with God's agenda. Because you will not like to offend or to victimize the person that you love. I pray for myself and I pray for you. The opening prayer asks God to help us to relish what He commands. If we love God, we will obey His command, so that we may merit what He promised. May God give us the grace to live this life of love, especially in Nigeria, and merit the ultimate triumph of those who have been able to show love to their neighbors. Because after all, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 25, at that last judgment, the criteria will be, how much of love did you show to your neighbor? I'm asking you who are listening to me, how much of love have you been able to express to your neighbor and to God? May God give us the grace to prepare ourselves in such a way that we may answer this question creatively well at the end of our life sojourn. This is my prayer for you, and this is my prayer for myself. May God give us the grace to survive in Nigeria. God bless you. Stay safe. Stay out of trouble in these evil times. People are using babies to make charms for fortification. People are killing people, ritual kidnapping, ritual fortifications, all forms of deceit and 419. May God shield me and shield you in these troubled times so that we may survive. And may God grant us the grace to experience love, true love in this world, and experience eternal beatification in the next one, even as I bless you and all of us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.